Snow drifts over a quiet American town where an old police officer wakes before dawn, haunted by a sound no one else can hear. The faint ring of a bicycle bell echoing through the fog. It's been years since his wife's death, but that sound, it belongs to her. And when his little girl begins drawing the same shadow that haunts his dreams, the line between memory and danger begins to blur. Some say ghosts speak through the wind, but what if they speak through the living? Stay with me as we uncover a secret buried beneath the river. A secret that could change everything this man thought he knew about love, loss, and forgiveness. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments. And may your day be filled with warmth, peace, and a little bit of wonder. Snow drifted lazily through the quiet morning sky over Maple Hollow, a small mountain town tucked between pine forests and frozen lakes in northern Montana. It was the kind of town where winters were long and the roads sang under the weight of ice. Wooden chimneys released slow curls of smoke, and the world felt suspended, like God himself was holding his breath. In the middle of Hawthorne Street, at the end of a cobblestone lane, stood a small two-story house painted pale blue. Its windows were fogged from the warmth inside, and outside, in the front courtyard, a 10-year-old girl was crouched beside a rusted bicycle. Her name was Lily Grant. Lily was small for her age, thin-shouldered and bright-eyed, with a narrow face that seemed older than her years. Her hair, chestnut brown and slightly tangled, peeked out from beneath a knitted red hat that had once belonged to her mother. Her gloves were frayed, her boots scuffed, but she handled the old bicycle with the delicate reverence of a museum curator handling a relic. Each morning, before school, she would wipe its metal frame with a piece of faded cloth, tracing her fingers along the bent handlebar, the cracked leather seat, and the tiny brass bell that still shone faintly through the rust. When she pressed the bell, ting, ting, it rang weakly, but it was the sound that began every day for her. Her late mother, Evelyn Grant, had called it the sound of joy. To Lily, it was now the sound of memory. Evelyn had passed away just over a year ago, one rainy afternoon when the clouds had hung low and the world had felt drained of color. Since then, the bicycle had been the only thing that still carried Evelyn's warmth. The front door creaked open, and Officer Ethan Grant, Lily's father, stepped into the cold. Ethan was 39, tall and broad-shouldered, his navy blue uniform pressed to perfection. His hair was short, brown dusted with the first hints of gray, and his face was clean-shaven except for a faint stubble he never managed to fully erase. His eyes were blue but tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many memories. Before becoming a police officer in Maple Hollow, Ethan had worked in Chicago's homicide division. But after losing Evelyn, he had transferred to this quiet town to start over. His colleagues admired his professionalism, methodical, calm, never raising his voice. But behind that steadiness was a man afraid of losing control again. He sipped his coffee from a silver thermos and leaned against the doorframe. "Careful with those brakes, sweetheart," he said, his voice deep but warm. "The roads are still icy." Lily didn't look up, still cleaning. "I know, Dad." Ethan smiled faintly, watching her for a moment. The sound of the bell echoed softly, brushing against the silence. Something about that sound always tugged at him, like a ghost whispering through the wind. He turned to leave for work, glancing back once more before the door shut. Inside the house, the faint aroma of perfume mixed with the scent of morning coffee. Standing near the living room mirror was Madison Grant, Ethan's new wife. Madison was in her early 30s, tall, slender, with dark auburn hair styled perfectly even on ordinary mornings. Her reflection smiled back at her, practiced and elegant, her lips painted coral red, her eyes sharp beneath long lashes. She wore a white silk blouse, though she wasn't going anywhere that day. Madison had been a real estate agent in Spokane before she met Ethan at a departmental charity event. Widowed life had left Ethan vulnerable, and Madison had entered it with the ease of someone used to taking control of rooms and people. To outsiders, she was charming, courteous, and polished, but those who looked closer might see the faint tension in her smile, a flicker of calculation behind her gaze. Her beauty was almost fragile, the kind that could shatter if someone looked too honestly. She had grown up poor in Oregon, and though she rarely spoke of it, the bitterness of those years hardened her. To Madison, weakness was a thing to be despised. Perhaps that was why Lily's quiet, unpolished innocence stirred something uncomfortable in her, a reflection of the vulnerability she'd buried long ago. As Ethan left for the precinct, he leaned down to kiss Madison's cheek. "I'll be late tonight. Another case review." Madison brushed imaginary lint off his shoulder and smiled sweetly. "Of course. Be safe." When the door closed, her smile vanished. She walked to the window and looked down at the small figure still bent over the old bike. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Still polishing that junk," she muttered under her breath. A soft chime of the bell answered her, and the sound grated. Madison turned away, her jaw tightening. By the time Lily finished, her hands were numb. She stood, brushed the snow from her coat, and wheeled the bicycle toward the gate. As she passed the window, she caught Madison's reflection in the glass, a faint silhouette framed by the drapes, lips moving but indistinct. Lily pretended not to notice and pedaled down the sloping street, the bike wobbling slightly on the icy road. She rode slowly through the sleepy town. The storefronts were still half covered in snow, the open signs hanging crookedly behind frosted glass. A man in a brown parka waved to her, a local baker named Mr. Harland, short and round, known for always smelling of cinnamon. "Morning, Lily," he called. "Morning, sir," she chirped back, her voice light though her eyes were distant. At the end of Maple Avenue, she stopped at the crossing light. Beyond the intersection, near the sheriff's station, she saw a police truck pulling in, its headlights catching the flakes of snow. A tall man stepped out, leading a large German shepherd by the leash. The dog's coat was black and tan, its fur thick, its gait powerful but cautious. Its ears twitched at every sound, and when it looked toward Lily, its dark eyes were alert yet gentle, eyes that had seen both command and loss. The handler, Deputy Aaron Brooks, was one of Ethan's colleagues. "Morning, Valor," he said, patting the dog's head before heading inside. The dog sat obediently, breath misting in the cold. The name on his collar read, Valor. Lily smiled faintly at the dog. "Hi there," she whispered, before pedaling off again. Valor tilted his head, listening. There was something about the faint jingling of that bell that made his ears perk up. For a brief second, his tail wagged once. Back at the Grant household, Madison was on the phone, her voice honey-sweet. "Oh yes, Ethan's doing well. Such a hard-working man," she said to a friend, though her tone shifted the moment she glanced at the muddy footprints Lily had left near the hallway. Her smile flattened. "Excuse me a sec." She ended the call, grabbed a mop, and began cleaning furiously. The rhythm of her motions grew harsher, almost punishing. When the doorbell rang, she startled. It was Mrs. Hendricks, their elderly neighbor, bundled in a thick plaid coat. Her face was kind but marked with wrinkles that deepened when she smiled. "Morning, dear," she greeted. "I baked some blueberry muffins. Thought Lily might like a few." Madison's lips curved mechanically. "That's so thoughtful, Mrs. Hendricks. Thank you." "She's such a sweet child," the old woman continued. "Always riding that little bike of hers. Reminds me of Evelyn." Madison cut her off smoothly. "Yes, well, we're moving on now. New beginnings." She accepted the basket, thanked her again, and closed the door a bit too quickly. The name Evelyn lingered in the air like smoke. Madison placed the muffins on the counter, staring at them as if they'd personally offended her. That evening, Ethan returned home later than expected, his boots soaked and his expression weary. Valor followed him in. Ethan had offered to foster the dog temporarily, saying he needed a sense of purpose around the house. Valor padded quietly across the floor, sniffing the corners before settling near the fire. Lily gasped softly when she saw him. "Is he ours?" Ethan smiled tiredly. "For now, his name's Valor. He's been through a lot. Lost his handler last year. Thought maybe we could give him a warm place for a while." Lily approached cautiously. Valor lifted his head, his dark eyes watching her every move. When her small hand touched his fur, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, resting his chin on her palm. Madison watched from the hallway, arms folded. "Another stray," she muttered quietly. But Ethan heard. He turned to her, his tone firm. "He's not a stray. He's part of the unit, and he's family now." Madison forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course." Later that night, as snow began falling harder, Lily sat by the fire with Valor lying beside her. She ran her fingers through his fur, whispering, "You miss someone too, huh?" Valor's ears twitched, and he let out a quiet huff that sounded almost like an answer. In the kitchen, Ethan looked at the old photo of Evelyn pinned to the fridge, a smiling woman in her 30s, wearing a white scarf and holding Lily as a toddler. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Madison entered behind him, her perfume sharp and heavy. "You're thinking about her again," she said softly, not as a question. Ethan didn't reply. The silence between them stretched thin as the ticking clock on the wall. In the living room, the faint sound of the bicycle bell rang again. Lily had found a way to fix it. Valor lifted his head and wagged his tail once. The ting-ting echoed through the quiet house, fragile yet alive. Outside, snow kept falling over Maple Hollow, covering everything in white, as if the world itself was trying to start anew. Morning came late in Maple Hollow, the winter sun climbing slowly through a curtain of gray clouds. Frost clung to every window pane, and the streets gleamed like frozen rivers. Inside the Grant household, the smell of brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of pine wood burning in the fireplace. Ethan was already in uniform, fastening his badge while Valor sat by the door, tail sweeping lightly across the rug, eyes bright with anticipation. The dog's thick black and tan fur glimmered under the morning light, and a faint white streak above his brow caught the sun. A mark from an old wound, one that no one had dared to ask about. Ethan glanced at him, then at Lily, who sat silently at the table, eating oatmeal without appetite. Her red hat hung on the chair beside her. The repaired bike bell rested on the counter, faintly polished. "Hey, champ," Ethan said softly, crouching beside his daughter. "You want me to drive you to school today? Roads look icy." Lily shook her head, not looking up. "I'll be fine, Dad." He hesitated, then nodded, kissed the top of her head, and left. Valor followed him, but before stepping out, the dog looked back toward Lily, as if to make sure she was safe, then vanished through the door, leaving only the echo of his claws on the wooden floor. When the engine of the patrol truck faded into the distance, Madison emerged from the hallway, robe tied neatly around her waist. Her auburn hair fell perfectly over her shoulders, every strand deliberate. She was beautiful in that brittle, careful way of people who need to be perfect to survive. Madison had grown up as the eldest of 4 in a broken home, the kind where shouting was the only language and forgiveness never lasted more than a night. She'd learned early that power came from perception. How people saw you was more important than who you truly were. That lesson had never left her. She smiled now, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You forgot to say goodbye to your father." Lily's spoon clinked softly against the bowl. "He was in a hurry." Madison crossed the room, her robe whispering against the floor, and sat opposite the girl. "He works hard, you know, for both of us. You should try to make things easier for him." Lily frowned slightly. "I didn't do anything wrong." Madison's hand touched the table, her manicured nails tapping twice. "Sometimes not doing something is the problem." Lily didn't answer. She stood and carried her bowl to the sink. Behind her, Madison's reflection glimmered faintly in the kitchen window. For a second, Lily thought she saw something cold flicker there, something sharp, like steel under ice. Outside, snow fell again. At the police station, Ethan was reviewing a file with Deputy Aaron Brooks, a stocky man in his early 40s with a mustache that looked like it had survived every coffee spill in the county. Brooks was dependable and loyal, the kind of man who never asked questions he didn't need to. "You bringing Valor full-time?" he asked, flipping through a report. Ethan nodded. "He's got potential, just needs time." "Time heals all wounds, huh?" Brooks grinned. Ethan didn't smile back. "Sometimes." He didn't say what he really thought. That time healed nothing. It only taught you how to hide the scars. Valor sat beside the desk, silent, but his ears twitched each time Ethan moved. Every sound in the room mattered to him. Every gesture was a signal. He'd been trained that way. A dog like Valor wasn't just muscle. He was intuition wrapped in fur. He could sense emotions the way others sense temperature. When Ethan sighed, Valor's head lifted. When Ethan's tone dropped, the dog's eyes darkened too. They headed out later to check an abandoned shed near the edge of town, reports of break-ins. The air was sharp enough to cut skin. While Ethan inspected the broken lock, Valor's nose pressed against the snow, following a scent trail that led toward the woods. The dog's body stiffened. He let out a low growl. Ethan turned instantly, hand on his holster. "What is it, boy?" From behind a tree, a teenager stumbled out. Thin, pale, barely 16. His clothes were torn, his face bruised. He raised both hands. "Don't shoot! I just needed somewhere warm." Ethan relaxed slightly. "Name?" "Sam," the boy muttered. "Sam Porter." He was small, all bones and fear, his brown hair matted from weeks without care. His eyes darted between Ethan and Valor, who stood poised, muscles tense but not aggressive. Ethan gestured for him to sit on the back of the truck's tailgate. "You're not in trouble, kid, but this place isn't safe to camp. Got anywhere to stay?" The boy shook his head. "My dad, he's gone. Mom's in the hospital." Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of his badge like a chain. "All right, let's get you something hot to eat first." Valor nudged the boy's leg gently before climbing into the truck bed. The dog seemed to understand that this wasn't a criminal. It was just another lost soul. Back home, Madison opened the front door to find Lily polishing the bike again in the courtyard, the afternoon sun glancing off the metal frame. "Are you seriously still doing that?" Madison asked, her voice sharp as glass. "It was my mom's," Lily said simply. Madison's smile flickered. "Yes, and your mom is gone. You can't keep living inside a memory, Lily. People will start to pity you." "I don't care," Lily replied, too softly to sound defiant, but firm enough to make Madison's eyes narrow. "You should care," she said, stepping closer, "because pity is worse than hate. Pity makes you small." Lily didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She went quiet. Madison sighed and turned back toward the house. "Don't scratch." "The paint," she said, without looking back. As the door closed, Lily's hand tightened on the cloth. She didn't know what she had done wrong, only that her chest hurt when people talked about forgetting. That evening, the snowstorm returned stronger. Ethan came home late, soaked and cold, his patrol jacket dusted with ice. He carried 2 paper cups of cocoa, one for Lily and one for Sam. The boy now sitting on their couch under a blanket, Valor curled beside him. Madison's expression was unreadable. "Who's that?" she asked, voice deceptively calm. "A kid from town," Ethan replied, taking off his jacket. "Runaway. We'll keep him for the night till social services open tomorrow." Madison's lips twitched. "This isn't a shelter, Ethan." Ethan met her eyes. "It's warm. That's enough for now." Sam looked up timidly. "Thank you, ma'am." Madison forced a smile. "Of course, dear." Later, while Ethan checked reports in the study, Madison approached the boy. "How long have you been sleeping outside?" "Couple weeks," Sam murmured. "Didn't want to go to foster care." "I see." Her tone softened, but her eyes remained distant. "You're lucky. Officer Grant? He has a kind heart." Sam smiled faintly. "And his dog, too." Valor, lying nearby, raised his head at the mention, tail thumping once. Madison's gaze flicked toward the dog. "Yes," she said after a pause, "but kindness can be dangerous when it blinds you." The boy didn't understand what she meant, and perhaps she didn't either. Not fully. When everyone had gone to bed, Madison stood before the hallway mirror, brushing her hair. Her reflection stared back, expressionless. For a moment, she thought she saw Evelyn's face instead. Gentle, unafraid, unbroken. Madison's hand froze. Then, almost violently, she slammed the brush down on the counter. "You're not coming back," she whispered to the empty room. In the living room, Valor lifted his head, ears pricked. The faint ting-ting of Lily's bike bell echoed from the yard outside, carried by the wind. He stood, padded to the window, and watched the snow swirling around the bike. The small brass bell gleamed faintly under the porch light. And somewhere inside Valor's mind, the sound became something else. A call, a promise, a memory of loyalty that hadn't yet found its peace. He lay back down beside the couch, eyes half open, guarding the sleeping child and the lost boy, while upstairs, the woman in the mirror whispered to her reflection, and the house filled once more with quiet walls that listened but never spoke. The next morning broke with a fragile stillness. A thin layer of ice glazed the windows of the Grant house, and the world outside seemed muted, as though sound itself had frozen overnight. Inside, Ethan stirred from his half-sleep, his hand resting on Valor's fur. The dog lay on the rug beside the bed, eyes open even in rest, his breath slow and steady. He never truly slept, not since his handler's death a year ago during a botched raid in Spokane. He had learned to wake at the slightest change in tone, at the smallest shift of emotion in the air. When Ethan sat up, Valor raised his head immediately, stretching before pressing his nose to the officer's hand, as if to say, "You're still here? Good." Downstairs, Madison was already moving through the kitchen, her robe replaced by a crisp turtleneck sweater and pearl earrings that caught the morning light. She was slicing apples into perfect wedges, her motions precise, almost mechanical. The house smelled of cinnamon and burnt toast. "Good morning," she said as Ethan entered, though her voice lacked warmth. "Morning," he replied, rubbing his eyes. He noticed Lily's empty chair. "She awake yet?" "She left early," Madison said, arranging the apple slices onto a white plate. "Said she wanted to walk." Ethan frowned. "Walk? It's 12 degrees outside." Madison gave a small shrug. "She didn't ask my permission." He sighed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I'll talk to her when she gets home." Madison didn't answer, but there was a glint in her eyes that he didn't notice, a quiet satisfaction that came from watching control slip from someone else's grasp. At Maple Hollow Elementary, the morning bell rang through the crisp air. Lily walked through the school gates, her scarf pulled tight, her cheeks flushed from the cold. The children around her shouted and played, their laughter rising into the winter sky. But she walked silently, head lowered, her gloved hands gripping the handlebars of her bike. A group of kids near the entrance were talking loudly, led by Chloe Miller, a 12-year-old with bright blonde curls and a knack for cruelty disguised as charm. Chloe's father owned the town's hardware store, and her mother ran the local book club. Both names carried weight in Maple Hollow. "Nice bike," Chloe said with mock admiration, blocking Lily's path. "Did they dig that out of the junkyard?" Lily froze. She didn't answer. Another girl snickered. "It's older than my grandma." Lily's fingers tightened on the handlebar, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence hurt less than words. She pushed through the group without looking up, their laughter chasing her like stones thrown in the dark. From across the street, a woman watched the scene through the frosted glass of the cafe window. Sarah Connolly, the art teacher at the elementary school, was in her late 20s, short, and freckled with kind green eyes that carried both softness and fatigue. She had once dreamed of being a painter in New York, but returned to Maple Hollow to care for her ailing mother. Now, she taught watercolor classes in the afternoons and baked muffins for her students in the mornings. Sarah noticed the hunched shoulders, the downcast gaze of the small girl, and something in her heart stirred. When class began, Lily sat in the second row, her notebook open, her pencil hovering but unmoving. Sarah knelt beside her desk. "That's a lovely drawing, Lily," she said gently. Lily blinked, startled. "It's not done." Sarah smiled softly. "That's okay. Sometimes the unfinished things say the most." It was a small sentence, but it landed somewhere deep. For the first time that day, Lily looked up, her eyes clear but guarded. Sarah recognized that look, the same one she'd worn at 9 years old, when her own father had left and no one had told her why. She decided she'd keep an eye on this girl. Back at the station, Ethan was filling out paperwork when Brooks poked his head through the door. "Social services took the kid," he said, referring to Sam. Ethan nodded. "Good." Brooks hesitated. "You sure?" He looked terrified getting in that van. Ethan frowned. "He'll be fine. They'll find him a place." Brooks leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You ever notice how we always say that, like it's a guarantee?" Ethan didn't reply. He just stared at the report in front of him, a burglary case that suddenly felt meaningless. Valor lay beside his chair, head on his paws, watching both men silently. "Anyway," Brooks continued, "you're coming to the town council dinner tonight, right? The chief wants all department heads there." Ethan groaned softly. "I'll try. Depends on Lily." Brooks grinned. "Bring the kid. Maybe she'll enjoy it." Ethan smiled faintly, though his mind was already elsewhere, wondering if Lily had made it to school safely. At home, Madison spent the afternoon cleaning. a ritual more than a necessity. Every object had to be aligned, every reflection in the glass spotless. She paused at the living room mirror, examining her face. The woman looking back at her was flawless, composed. But in the depths of her own reflection, she saw a faint shadow behind her, a shape like a woman in white. She blinked, and it was gone. Evelyn's photograph on the wall caught her eye. Madison stared at it for a long moment, the edges of her composure cracking. She picked up the frame, ran her fingers over the smiling woman's face. "You think you can haunt me?" she whispered. Her tone was low, almost trembling. "You left him broken, and I had to fix what you destroyed." The sound of a car door outside made her freeze. Ethan's truck. She hurried to set the frame back and smoothed her hair, her expression instantly shifting, back to the polished version of herself. Ethan entered with Valor at his side, the dog's fur sprinkled with snowflakes. "Evening," he said, hanging up his jacket. "Lily back yet?" "In her room," Madison replied smoothly. "She's quiet today. I think something at school upset her." Ethan's brows furrowed. "Did she say what?" Madison shook her head with a small sigh. "Children are complicated, Ethan. Maybe she just needs stricter guidance." He gave her a long look, but didn't argue. He went upstairs. When he opened Lily's door, he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, the old bike bell in her hand. She was turning it slowly, as though trying to find a sound trapped inside. Ethan knelt beside her. "Rough day?" She nodded. "Want to talk about it?" She hesitated. "They laughed at my bike, said it's ugly." Ethan sighed softly. "People say stupid things. You can't let them define what's beautiful." Lily glanced at him, her voice small. "Did Mom ever ride this with me?" He smiled faintly. "Every weekend." She said the sound of the bell made her feel alive. Lily looked down at the brass bell, the faintest curve of a smile flickering. "Then I'll keep ringing it." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her he was proud, that he'd never let anything hurt her again, but the words caught somewhere between guilt and exhaustion. He ruffled her hair instead. "Dinner in 10 minutes, okay?" When he left, Madison was watching from the hallway, her expression unreadable. Later that night, after Lily went to bed, Madison poured herself a glass of wine and joined Ethan by the fire. "You know, maybe sending her to that art class would help," she said casually. "The one at the community center. She spends too much time alone." Ethan looked surprised. "That's actually a good idea." Madison smiled sweetly, though her mind was far away. The truth was, she wanted Lily out of the house, at least for a few hours each week. The girl's silence was becoming unbearable. Valor stirred from his spot near the door, his eyes snapping open, his ears pricked, head tilting toward the window. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ethan stood immediately. "What is it, boy?" Valor padded to the window, nose against the glass. Outside, the streetlights flickered in the snow. For a brief second, Ethan thought he saw a shadow move near the fence, a tall figure cloaked in dark, but when he opened the door, the yard was empty. Only the soft crunch of snow under his boots. "Probably a stray," he muttered, though the unease lingered. Valor remained by the door long after, eyes fixed on the darkness, body still as stone. Upstairs, Lily turned in her sleep, clutching the bike bell in her small hand. The night pressed in around the house, and for the first time, Ethan felt the silence not as peace, but as warning. By the time dawn stretched over Maple Hollow, the air had turned brittle and pale. Frost coated the rooftops like powdered glass, and the first weak light of morning crept across the horizon. Inside the Grant household, silence reigned again, an uneasy, delicate quiet that seemed ready to shatter at the slightest sound. Madison stood by the kitchen window, her fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup of black coffee. She was still in her robe, her auburn hair loosely tied, but her reflection in the glass looked sharper than the woman herself, controlled, precise, almost unrecognizable. In the background, the old wall clock ticked, steady as a heartbeat. Ethan had already left for work. He'd stopped by Lily's room before heading out, watching her sleep for a moment. Her face was turned toward the window, soft under the dim light, one small hand clutching the brass bell from her bike. He wanted to tell her something, anything, that could make up for the weight he felt pressing between them. But all he managed was to brush a loose strand of hair from her forehead before stepping away. Now, only Madison and Valor remained in the kitchen. The dog sat by the back door, muscles taut, head resting on his paws, eyes following every movement Madison made. She could feel him watching, that steady, silent judgment that made her skin prickle. "What are you staring at?" she muttered. Valor didn't move. She hated the dog's stillness. It reminded her of the way people looked at her when she was younger. People who thought they knew better. People who believed kindness was the same as goodness. But kindness was a luxury she'd never been given. Her father, a gambler with a cruel tongue, had left when she was 7, and her mother's bitterness had filled the void. Madison had learned early that love was a transaction. You give what someone wants, and you get what you need. And right now, what she needed was control. She turned away, setting her cup down with too much force. "You're just a dog," she said, voice tight. "Stop acting like you understand." Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. Lily was awake. When the girl came down, bundled in her thick blue coat, Madison's tone softened immediately. "Morning, sweetheart. Breakfast on the table." Lily nodded, wary but polite. She sat and ate quietly. Madison stood behind her, arms crossed. "So, how's school? Any trouble?" Lily shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Your art teacher, Ms. Connolly, called yesterday," Madison continued casually. "She said you have talent. Maybe she'll turn you into a little painter." Lily looked up, surprised. "She called?" "Yes," Madison replied, her smile thin. "Seems you made quite the impression." For a moment, warmth flickered in Lily's eyes, but then Madison leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Just remember, people say nice things when they want to feel good about themselves. Don't start thinking you're special." The words hit like cold water. Lily froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Madison straightened, satisfied by the silence that followed. At the police station, the day was just beginning. Deputy Brooks leaned over Ethan's desk, handing him a new file. "Another break-in, same area as last week." Ethan sighed. "Maple Ridge again?" "Yeah, tools and bikes stolen from a garage this time. Locals are getting nervous." Ethan rubbed his temple. "Let's drive by after lunch. Maybe it's one of those transients moving through." As they talked, Valor sat near the door, alert. He hadn't barked once, but his ears flicked with each sound. Something about his focus today was different, restless, almost impatient. Brooks grinned. "That dog of yours could stare a man into confessing." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes I think he reads minds." They both laughed, but only half-heartedly. Outside, snow started to fall again, heavier this time, turning the air white. At school, Sarah Connolly stood in front of her art class, her sleeves rolled up, her auburn curls tucked behind her ears. Today's lesson was about light and shadow. "Everything has both," she told her students. "The trick is learning where one ends and the other begins." When she reached Lily's desk, she paused. The girl had drawn a small house beneath a wide, dark sky. The lines were careful, but sad. Sarah crouched beside her. "You draw like someone who listens a lot," she said softly. Lily hesitated. "Listening's easier than talking." Sarah nodded, her smile tinged with empathy. "Maybe, but sometimes art talks for you." She tore a small piece of paper from her notebook and wrote something. "Here, this is for you. My studio's open on weekends. If you ever want a place to paint, stop by." Lily took the note as if it were a secret too precious to show anyone. That afternoon, the snowstorm worsened. Ethan texted Madison to say he'd be home late. She read the message with tight lips. She'd spent most of the day replaying the conversation with Lily, feeling that strange, sour ache that always came when she saw the girl happy. She didn't want to hurt her, not exactly. She just couldn't stand being invisible in her own house. By the time evening came, the storm howled through Maple Hollow like a living thing. Madison was pacing the kitchen when she noticed the bike still outside by the fence, half buried in snow. Her jaw clenched. "How many times," she muttered, "do I have to see that thing?" She grabbed her coat, marched outside, and yanked the bike upright. The metal was ice cold beneath her fingers. The bell jingled faintly, its sound fragile but defiant. Madison's breath steamed in the air. "You think this makes you closer to her?" she whispered, her words dissolving in the wind. "She's gone, Lily. Gone." Behind her, the back door creaked open. "Mom?" Madison froze. Lily stood in the doorway, small and pale, the wind whipping her scarf around her face. "Don't touch it," she said quietly. "I'm cleaning it," Madison snapped, her voice cracking. "No," Lily said, stepping closer. "You hate it." Madison's hand trembled on the handlebar. "You don't understand what hate is." Valor barked suddenly from inside, low and sharp. The sound made both of them jump. Madison spun toward the noise, and in that split second, her grip on the bike slipped. The front wheel jerked, knocking against the stone path. The bell fell off, bouncing once before landing in the snow. Lily gasped and ran forward, scooping it up. "You broke it!" "It was an accident," Madison said, but her tone was too quick, too defensive. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "This was Mom's!" Madison's temper snapped. "Stop saying her name!" she shouted, voice echoing through the yard. "Your mother is gone! Do you hear me? She's gone!" The words hung in the freezing air, heavy as stones. Lily stood motionless, clutching the bell to her chest. Inside, Valor barked again, louder this time. Ethan's truck tires crunched on the snow outside the gate. The headlights swept across the yard, illuminating the two figures, one trembling, one breathing hard. Ethan stepped out, his voice sharp. "What's going on?" Madison turned immediately, tears springing to her eyes on cue. She yelled at me," she stammered. "I was just trying to help." "I didn't," Lily cried. "She broke Mom's bell." Ethan looked from one to the other, confusion etched into every line of his face. "Enough!" he barked, more out of exhaustion than anger. "Go inside, both of you." Lily hesitated, then ran past him, into the house. Madison lingered, wiping her eyes delicately. "I don't know how to reach her," she whispered. Ethan rubbed his forehead, the tension in his shoulders like stone. "Maybe she doesn't need reaching. Maybe she just needs space." Madison looked at him, something flickering in her gaze, hurt or fury or both. "And what about me, Ethan?" But he had already turned away. Later, after the house went quiet, Ethan sat alone by the fire. Valor lay at his feet, head resting on his paws. The bell sat on the table between them, slightly bent but intact. Ethan turned it over in his hand, watching the light dance across its surface. "Seems like everything's breaking around here," he murmured. Valor lifted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in silence. The storm didn't end the next morning. It only changed its voice. By dawn, the snow had turned to cold rain, thick and gray, washing away the white purity that had covered Maple Hollow. Water streamed down the gutters, pooling along the sidewalks like thin rivers. The Grant house sat under the gloomy sky, its blue paint dulled by the wet. Inside, silence had grown heavier. Even Valor seemed subdued, lying in the hallway with his head on his paws, ears twitching every time a floorboard creaked. Ethan left early for work, though his mind wasn't with the police reports he carried. His thoughts kept circling back to the night before, to Madison's trembling voice, to Lily's tear-streaked face, to the bent brass bell now lying on his desk like a wound. He told himself he'd talk to his daughter tonight, make things right, but deep down, he wasn't sure if he still knew how. Madison stood by the window after he left, staring at the rain-soaked yard. Her face was pale and drawn, the mask of grace slipping at its edges. She'd spent half the night replaying her own outburst, the scream that had torn from her lips. "Your mother is gone." It had echoed in her mind until it sounded like someone else's voice. She wasn't sure which frightened her more, that she had said it or that she had meant it. Upstairs, Lily sat on her bed, staring at the small box that once held her mother's keepsakes. Inside lay the folded letter Evelyn had written years before, its paper yellowed and soft. She couldn't read the words anymore without them blurring. She felt a hollow space inside her chest, one no apology could fill. When she heard Madison moving downstairs, she quickly folded the letter back into the box and tucked it under her pillow. Later that morning, Madison knocked on the door. "Breakfast?" she said. Her voice sounded almost gentle. Lily didn't answer. "I made pancakes," Madison continued, forcing cheer into her tone. "Your favorite." The girl stared at the window instead. Rain beaded on the glass like tears. When there was still no reply, Madison exhaled sharply. Suit yourself? She left, muttering something under her breath that Lily couldn't catch. Downstairs, Valor watched Madison walk past him, her heels clicking on the tile. The dog's head followed her silently, his eyes steady and unreadable. Madison stopped, meeting his gaze. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered. "You don't know anything." But the longer she stared at him, the more she felt as though he did. At the precinct, Deputy Brooks leaned against Ethan's desk, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Cop." "You all right, partner? You look like you wrestled a bear last night and lost." Ethan managed a tired smile. "Just a rough evening. Lily and Madison aren't exactly getting along." Brooks nodded knowingly. "Step-parent stuff, huh? My sister went through the same thing. Takes patience." "Patience," Ethan repeated quietly. "Yeah." Before Brooks could answer, the radio on the wall crackled. "Unit 4, we've got a disturbance at the Maple Hollow Library. Possible vandalism." Ethan grabbed his jacket. "That's us." They arrived to find Helen Marsh, the librarian, waiting in the doorway. Helen was in her late 50s, short and wiry, her silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She had the energy of someone who had spent decades defending her books from sticky fingers and careless whispers. "It's the local kids," she declared, arms crossed. "Again, they spray-painted the back wall." Ethan sighed. "Any idea who?" "Probably the same ones that hang out near the bridge," she said, lowering her voice. "I told the mayor weeks ago to install lights there, but no one listens." While Brooks went to take photos, Ethan noticed Valor sniffing near the back door. The dog's tail stiffened, his nose twitching. Then, without warning, he barked twice, short, urgent sounds. Ethan followed his gaze toward the street. Through the rain, a small figure on a bicycle was moving fast, soaked from head to toe. "Lily?" Ethan murmured, his heart jolting. He recognized the small red hat, the one Evelyn had knitted. He ran to the car, but the rain swallowed her silhouette before he could reach the corner. Lily pedaled furiously down the narrow roads of Maple Hollow, the wheels cutting through puddles. The cold bit at her hands, her clothes plastered to her skin. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she had to leave. Each rotation of the pedals was a heartbeat pounding against fear. She carried the broken bell in her coat pocket, its faint weight reminding her she hadn't left her mother completely behind. The rain blurred the streets until everything looked like memory. She passed the bakery where Mr. Harland used to wave at her, the park where her father once taught her to ride without training wheels. Everything familiar now looked distant, ghost-like. By afternoon, the rain grew heavier. Her legs ached, her breaths came in short bursts. She turned down the road leading toward the old bridge on the edge of town, the same place Ethan and Valor had investigated weeks earlier. The wooden planks were slick, the railings dark with age. Beneath, the river roared, swollen with rain. She stopped halfway across, her chest heaving. For the first time since leaving home, the silence around her was total. She pulled out the bell and stared at it through the downpour. Its metal glinted faintly, dented but still whole. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I can't stay there anymore." Behind her, a low growl broke the quiet. Lily turned sharply. A dark figure stood at the far end of the bridge, half hidden by rain. A man in a gray hooded coat, tall, slouched. His face was shadowed, but even from that distance, something about him radiated unease. He took a slow step forward. Lily froze, gripping the handlebars. "Who are you?" No answer. The man's posture shifted, his head tilting as though studying her. Then, suddenly, he started walking faster. Fear took over. Lily turned her bike around, the tires slipping on the wet planks. She tried to pedal, but the wheel caught between two boards. "Please, no!" she gasped, pulling hard. A voice cut through the rain. "Lily!" It was Ethan, running toward her, coat drenched, Valor at his side. The dog barked once, loud and commanding. The man froze. Ethan's gun was already drawn. "Police! Step back!" he shouted. The stranger hesitated, then turned and bolted into the woods. Valor lunged forward, but Ethan called him back. The man vanished into the curtain of rain. Ethan reached Lily, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling. Dad, I just wanted to go away. I'm sorry. He pulled her into his arms, rain streaming down both their faces. Don't ever do that again, he said hoarsely. You scared me half to death. Lily clung to him, the broken bell pressed between them. By the time they got home, night had fallen. Madison was pacing near the window, her face pale when she saw them. Where have you, she began, but Ethan cut her off. Not now. He carried Lily upstairs, wrapped her in blankets, and sat beside her until she fell asleep. Valor lay curled at the foot of the bed, his eyes half closed but alert. Downstairs, Madison waited at the kitchen table, the half-empty wineglass beside her, trembling slightly. You think this is my fault, she said when Ethan finally came down. He hesitated. I think she's a child who's hurting. Madison laughed softly, bitterly. And what about me? Do I get to hurt too? Ethan looked at her, the weight of years in his eyes. You had a choice, Madison. She didn't. She didn't answer. When he walked away, she whispered under her breath. Maybe none of us had a choice. Outside, rain hammered the roof like unspoken words. In Lily's room, Valor raised his head once, ears twitching at the thunder. Then, softly from beneath Lily's pillow, the bent brass bell chimed, once, faint and clear, as though Evelyn herself had just whispered, She's safe. The next day dawned under a strange, hesitant sunlight that glimmered across puddles and rooftops like glass. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Maple Hollow still smelled of damp earth and cold metal. Ethan stood on the porch, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. His gaze lingered on the road where he'd found Lily the night before, soaked, trembling, clutching that broken bell. The image wouldn't leave him. He'd seen trauma before, victims who'd lost everything. But when it was your own child, it cut deeper than any wound. Inside, Madison sat at the dining table in her robe, her hair unbrushed, her eyes rimmed red. The wineglass from last night still sat by her elbow. She didn't look up when Ethan came in. She hates me, she said flatly. She's a child, Ethan replied, setting his mug down. She's trying to make sense of everything. Madison laughed softly, a brittle sound. You think I don't try? Every day I'm walking on eggshells around her, trying to be the good wife, the good stepmother. But it's never enough. Ethan rubbed his forehead. This isn't about you, Madison. Lily just lost her mother. She's not the only one who lost something, Madison snapped, her eyes flashing. I lost my peace the day I walked into this house. The room went still. Valor, lying near the fireplace, lifted his head. His eyes moved between them like he was tracking the temperature of the air. Ethan sighed and turned away. We'll talk later. I've got to file a report about last night. As he left, Madison muttered under her breath. Maybe you should file one about this marriage, too. At the police station, Ethan sat at his desk staring at the blank incident form. He could still see that man's silhouette on the bridge, tall, slouched, face hidden by rain. The detail gnawed at him. If that stranger hadn't run, would he have hurt Lily? Was it just coincidence? He didn't like coincidences. He called Brooks over. Pull any recent reports of trespassing or loitering near the river, he said. Brooks frowned. You think the guy's tied to the break-ins? Maybe, Ethan said, though something deeper told him it wasn't about theft. He was watching her. That wasn't random. Brooks nodded and went to check the system. Valor, sitting by Ethan's side, let out a quiet whine. Ethan patted his head absently. Yeah, boy, he murmured. I've got the same feeling. At Maple Hollow Elementary, Lily arrived late, still pale and quiet. Her classmates' chatter faded when she walked in. Some stared, others whispered. The news had already spread. A patrol car had been seen near the bridge last night. Children had a way of turning small truths into sharp rumors. Sarah Connolly was arranging paintbrushes when she noticed Lily's expression. You okay? She asked gently. Lily nodded without meeting her eyes. Just tired. Sarah crouched beside her desk. You know, she said softly, when I was your age, I ran away once too. I thought nobody wanted me. Turns out I was just too scared to see who did. Lily looked up, startled. Sarah smiled, her green eyes warm but shadowed by a private sorrow. Sometimes we carry storms inside us, she said, but storms pass. They always do. For the first time, Lily smiled faintly. When class ended, Sarah offered her a ride home, but Lily refused politely. She preferred walking. Something about the open air made her feel less trapped. Still, as the girl left, Sarah watched from the window, uneasy. The world felt darker than usual. That evening, Ethan arrived home to find Lily sitting on the couch with Valor's head resting in her lap. The dog's eyes were closed, tail flicking lazily each time she ran her fingers through his fur. Madison stood by the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables with sharp, deliberate motions. Ethan crouched beside Lily. "Hey," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," she murmured. "I'm sorry for running away." He exhaled in relief. "No more bridges, okay?" She nodded. "Okay." Madison's knife hit the cutting board a little too hard. "So we're just pretending nothing happened now?" she said coldly. Ethan stood. "I said we'd talk later." "It is later," Madison snapped. She slammed the knife down and turned to face him. "You always do this. You make me the villain, and she gets to play the poor little angel." Lily shrank back, clutching Valor's collar. "That's enough," Ethan said firmly. "No, it's not enough," Madison said, her voice trembling. "You think I don't see how you look at her, like she's all that's left of Evelyn. I can't compete with a ghost, Ethan." He stared at her, stunned. For a moment, he saw not anger, but desperation, the kind born of someone who knew she was losing something she'd never truly had. "I'm not asking you to compete," he said quietly. "Just stop taking it out on her." Madison's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She turned away, muttering, "Maybe I'm the one who should leave." But she didn't. Night fell heavy. The storm had passed, but the air felt thick, almost electric. Ethan sat on the porch steps, staring at the streetlights flickering in the mist. Valor lay beside him, calm but alert, ears twitching at every distant sound. The bond between them had deepened since the night on the bridge. Ethan trusted him more than most people now. He reached over and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You saved her?" he murmured. Valor blinked slowly, the faintest sound rumbling in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. From inside, the faint notes of a piano drifted out. Lily was playing something soft and hesitant. It wasn't a tune Ethan recognized, but the sound carried through the house like forgiveness. Then, glass shattering. Ethan bolted inside. Madison stood near the dining table, frozen, a wine glass broken at her feet. Her face was pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Madison," Ethan said. She pointed toward the window. Someone was outside. Ethan moved quickly to the back door, flashlight in hand, Valor close behind. The yard was empty, rainwater glistening on the grass. But near the fence, he saw it. A set of muddy footprints leading toward the trees. He followed them a few feet before they disappeared into the dark. Valor growled low, tail rigid. When Ethan returned, Madison was trembling. "It was him," she whispered. "The man from the bridge. You saw his face?" She shook her head. "No, just his shadow." Ethan exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure whether to believe her. Madison had been drinking again, that much was clear. But the footprints were real. "Lock every door," he said quietly. "Keep the lights on." Later that night, long after Madison had gone to bed, Ethan sat awake in the living room, Valor lying beside the window like a sentry. Outside, the world was silent again, but not peaceful. Around midnight, a sound came, a faint metallic ting. Ethan froze. It was the bell, the one from Lily's bike. He ran to her room, heart pounding. Lily was asleep, the bell resting on her nightstand. But it was still moving, swaying slightly, as though it had just been touched. Valor stood beside him, hackles raised, staring at the window. Ethan approached carefully and looked outside. Nothing but the empty yard, silvered under the moonlight. He reached for the curtain, ready to close it, then stopped. Etched faintly into the condensation on the glass were 3 words, drawn by a finger. "I see you." Ethan's blood turned cold. He wiped the glass quickly, but the message remained faintly visible under the moon's glow. Valor's growl deepened, quiet but steady. as if warning the night itself to keep its distance. Ethan turned off the lamp and sat by Lily's door until dawn, one hand resting on the dog's back, the other holding his holstered pistol. He didn't sleep. Morning arrived pale and silent, a ghost of sunlight spilling over the misty treetops. The world outside the Grant house looked deceptively peaceful, but inside, Ethan felt the tension coiled beneath every breath. He hadn't slept. The memory of the words etched into the window, "I see you," still pulsed behind his eyes. He'd wiped the glass clean at dawn, but the feeling lingered like a stain. Valor lay near the door, his head low, but his amber eyes sharp, every sound pulling his ears taut. He was 6 years old now, a powerful German shepherd with thick golden tan fur and a dark saddle across his back, his muscles tight beneath his coat. He had been trained for loyalty, protection, obedience, but what set him apart wasn't his training. It was the quiet intelligence in his eyes, a calm awareness that seemed almost human. Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee, though his hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and stale wine. Madison hadn't come downstairs yet, and he didn't want her to. He needed a moment of silence before facing her, before trying to explain what even he didn't understand. He looked toward the backyard where faint footprints still marked the wet grass near the fence. He'd taken photographs the night before, but something about them unsettled him. The prints were deep, too heavy for a normal stride, and led into the woods that bordered Maple Hollow, the same woods where the bridge stood. When Madison finally appeared, she looked pale, her robe wrapped tightly around her frame, her eyes lined with exhaustion. "Did you see anything?" she asked, her voice small, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Nothing clear," Ethan replied, "but someone was definitely out there. Maybe it was just kids." He shook his head. "Kids don't leave messages on glass, Madison." She hesitated, then whispered, "What if it's about her?" Ethan frowned. "Who?" "Evelyn." The name came out like a confession. "What if someone's trying to remind us of her? You said it yourself. The bell, the bridge, everything leads back to her." Ethan's expression hardened. "Don't start this." But Madison wasn't finished. "You never talk about her, Ethan, but she's everywhere in this house. In Lily's eyes, in the photographs you didn't take down, in that damn bicycle. Maybe she's haunting us in her own way." "That's enough," he said, sharper than he meant. Madison flinched. "You think I'm crazy? I think you need rest." She stared at him for a moment, then turned away, muttering, "You're not the only one who's afraid." Later that day, Ethan drove to the edge of the pines where the footprints had vanished. Valor trotted beside him, nose to the ground, tail low, alert. The woods were dense, the air damp and cool, filled with the scent of pine and soil. After 20 minutes of searching, Valor stopped abruptly, his ears pricking forward. He sniffed the ground, then barked once, short and urgent. Ethan knelt beside him. Half buried in the mud was a small silver lighter engraved with initials. M.H. Ethan frowned, wiping the mud away. Madison Hollis Grant. He stood, scanning the trees. "Madison?" he muttered to himself. Why would she have been out here? Before he could think further, a voice called from behind him. "Detective Grant?" He turned to see a man approaching through the trees, a tall figure in his mid-50s with a square jaw, weathered face, and a tan trench coat that looked more suited for city streets than forest trails. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back neatly, and his steel-gray eyes had the calm sharpness of someone used to seeing through lies. "Detective Harold Quinn," the man said, flashing a badge. "I got the call about your incident. Sheriff thought you could use another pair of eyes." Ethan studied him warily. "Quinn, I didn't request backup." The older man shrugged. "Heard there's been some strange activity out here. Thought you might appreciate the company." Quinn had a reputation, retired once, came back after his wife's death. People said he'd lost his empathy somewhere along the way, trading it for cold logic and long hours. Ethan pocketed the lighter. "Just following up on something from last night." "Mind if I take a look?" Quinn crouched beside the footprints, tracing them with his gloved finger. "These are deep. Whoever it was, they were carrying weight. Maybe boots." "That's what I thought." Quinn glanced up. "You think it's connected to the bridge incident?" Ethan hesitated. Maybe. Quinn stood and gave a thin smile. Then, you'd better start keeping your doors locked, Officer Grant. In my experience, shadows don't usually stop at glass. Ethan frowned, but before he could reply, Valor barked again, this time toward the left. They both turned as something darted between the trees. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, breaking into a run. The figure, a man, tall, wearing a dark coat, moved fast. Weaving through the trunks, Ethan and Valor gave chase, Quinn not far behind. The man stumbled once, glanced back, and for an instant Ethan saw his face, thin, pale, with a long scar running from jaw to temple. Then he vanished down a slope, and when Ethan reached the bottom, there was nothing but silence and the echo of retreating footsteps. "Damn it!" Ethan slammed a hand against a tree. Valor sniffed the ground, whining low. Quinn caught up, slightly winded. He knew the terrain. Locals don't move like that. "Yeah," Ethan muttered, and he knew where to look. That evening, the house felt colder than usual. Madison was in the kitchen, pretending to read, her eyes darting to the window every few minutes. Lily sat on the rug near Valor, sketching, quietly. She drew the woods, twisting trees, a bridge, and a shadow standing at its edge. Ethan entered, his jacket damp from the rain that had started again. "Lily," he said softly, "what are you drawing?" She looked up, hesitant. "The man from the bridge. I can't stop seeing him." Ethan crouched beside her, his heart tightening. The sketch was detailed, the slouched shoulders, the coat, the scar on the face. "Did you ever see him before that night?" She shook her head. "No, but sometimes I hear something outside my window. Not words, just breathing." Madison froze at the counter. "That's enough," she said quickly. "Don't scare her." Ethan stood. "She's not imagining it." Madison's eyes flashed. "You think someone's stalking us? Maybe it's you bringing your work home." "Stop it," Ethan said, tired but firm. Lily's pencil dropped, her small voice trembling. "Can we go away for a while? Just you, me, and Valor?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe we should," he said quietly. Madison turned sharply. "You can't just run away every time something goes wrong." "I'm not running," he said. "I'm protecting my family." For once, Madison didn't argue. She just stood there, her hands trembling slightly on the counter. Later that night, after everyone was in bed, Valor began to stir. His ears twitched, body tense. A faint sound came from outside, a branch snapping, too deliberate to be the wind. Ethan sat up instantly. The clock read 2:43 a.m. He reached for his gun and crept to the window. The yard was dark, only the faint outline of the fence visible through the mist. Then, a flicker. Someone standing at the tree line, still as a statue. Ethan raised the flashlight. The beam caught the scarred man's face for a split second before he vanished again into the trees. Valor growled low, ready to lunge. Ethan whispered, "Easy, boy." "Not yet." He slipped outside quietly, moving across the wet grass, the cold biting at his fingers. Near the fence, he stopped. Hanging from one of the posts was something that hadn't been there before, a small rusted bicycle bell tied with a black ribbon, and scratched crudely into the metal were 3 words, "Come find me." Ethan's breath caught. Valor pressed close, growling deep in his throat. The night seemed to tighten around them, heavy with threat and memory. Ethan pocketed the bell and whispered, "Not tonight." But inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the message appeared, Maple Hollow woke under a blanket of fog. The pines stood silent, their tops lost in mist, and the air smelled faintly of iron and rain. Ethan hadn't slept more than an hour. He sat at the kitchen table, the rusted bell on the counter between his hands. Its black ribbon had started to unravel, the words, "Come find me," faint but still legible. Every time he read them, something cold tightened in his chest, a fear that this wasn't random, that whoever was out there wasn't just taunting him, but knew him. Valor paced near the window, tail low, muscles taut. Every few minutes he growled softly at nothing, as if the forest itself whispered things only he could hear. Lily came downstairs quietly, still in her pajamas, clutching her sketchbook. Her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. She didn't speak at first. She sat across from her father, opening the sketchbook to a new page. "I had a dream," she said softly. "Mom was calling my name. She said, 'Stay away from the river.'" Ethan looked up sharply. "The river?" She nodded. She sounded scared. He swallowed. "It was just a dream, Lily." "I don't think so," she murmured. It felt real. Before Ethan could respond, Valor suddenly barked, deep and loud. The sound echoed through the house. He stood by the back door, fur bristling, teeth bared toward the woods. Ethan grabbed his sidearm and stepped out into the yard, Valor leading. The fog clung low, swallowing sound. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. "Show yourself!" Ethan called, his voice echoing faintly. No reply. He moved forward cautiously, Valor beside him, the leash taut. But then, as if in response, a faint metallic ding rang from the tree line, the exact tone of a bike bell. Ethan froze. "Stay," he whispered to Valor, who ignored him and lunged forward, barking fiercely. Ethan followed, pushing through thick brush until he reached a clearing near the stream. There, half buried in mud, was a child's drawing sealed in a plastic sleeve. It was Lily's, the same one she'd made of the bridge and the scarred man. But this time, another figure had been added. A tall woman with long hair, standing behind the man's shadow, one hand resting on his shoulder. Ethan's breath caught. The woman looked like Evelyn. A voice spoke behind him, calm but firm. "You shouldn't be out here alone." He spun around. Detective Quinn stood by the edge of the clearing, trench coat slick with dew. His face was unreadable, eyes flicking to the drawing. "You found something." Ethan handed him the sleeve. "Someone left this here, and they knew where to find us." Quinn studied the sketch. "Could be the same guy who's been stalking your house." "Or someone who knew my wife," Ethan said. The detective looked up, eyebrows raised. "You think this is personal?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Too many signs, the bridge, the bell, now her face in Lily's drawings. Whoever's doing this, they want me to believe Evelyn's still part of this story." Quinn pocketed the drawing carefully. "If that's true, they're manipulating you. People like that feed on fear. Or guilt," Ethan muttered. When Ethan returned home, Madison was waiting in the doorway, arms crossed, face pale but composed. "Where were you?" "Out checking the woods." Her eyes darted toward the forest line. "You should have woken me." "You were asleep." "No, Ethan, I wasn't." Her tone sharpened. "I heard Valor barking. I heard you leave. And I saw someone watching the house again." He froze. "You're sure?" Madison nodded. "Tall, wearing a gray coat. He stood near the fence for a minute. Then he just disappeared." Ethan frowned. "That's the same man from the bridge." Her voice trembled slightly. "You believe me now?" He didn't answer. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, holding her sketchbook. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "Mom's ring is gone." Ethan's stomach dropped. Evelyn's wedding ring, the one he'd kept locked in his drawer since her passing, was missing. He checked immediately. The drawer was open, the box gone. "Who took it?" Madison demanded. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. They all knew what it meant. Someone had been inside the house. That afternoon, Ethan met Quinn again at the station. The detective had been reviewing recent criminal activity and pulled up an old file. "Take a look at this," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy images of a man with a facial scar and a worn gray coat. "Name's Caleb Voss. Used to work as a security guard at a storage facility outside town. Got fired 2 years ago for breaking into one of the units." Ethan frowned. "What was in it?" "Property of Evelyn Grant," Quinn said quietly. Ethan's pulse quickened. "That's my wife." Quinn nodded. "Turns out she rented a unit under her maiden name. It was cleared after her death, but Voss accessed it before that." Ethan stared at the photo. The scarred face looked familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. "You think he's the one leaving the bells and messages?" "I think he's obsessed with your family," Quinn said. "Maybe he knew Evelyn somehow. Maybe he blames you for something." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then I'll find him before he finds her again." Quinn leaned back, studying him. "Careful, Grant. Men like him drag you into their madness, Don't follow him where he wants you to go. But Ethan was already halfway out the door. Back at the house, dusk had fallen. Madison was in the kitchen, the light casting her silhouette long against the wall. She was washing dishes, though the sink was empty. Her hands shook slightly as she moved. When Ethan entered, she didn't turn. "I called the station," she said quietly. "I told them I think someone's targeting us." "Good," Ethan said. "I didn't tell them about the ring," she added, glancing at him. "I thought you'd want to handle that yourself." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Madison hesitated. "Do you think he's coming back?" Ethan looked toward the window where Valor sat, watching the tree line. "Yes," he said softly. "And next time, I'll be ready." That night, the fog rolled in thicker than before, muffling sound and bending the light of the street lamps. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Lily had fallen asleep, clutching Valor's old training collar like a talisman. Ethan sat in the living room, pistol holstered, eyes fixed on the window. Then, faintly, ding. The sound of the bell again, this time closer. Ethan stood, moving silently toward the door. He stepped outside, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. The mist swallowed him within seconds. The sound came again. Ding, ding. Now from the direction of the pines. He followed it, Valor at his side, low to the ground. Then he saw it, a flicker of light through the trees, like a lantern swaying in the dark. He approached cautiously until the light revealed a small clearing. In its center stood a makeshift cross of wood and wire, and hanging from it, Evelyn's missing ring. Beneath it lay a note, weighed down by a stone. Ethan crouched and read the words scrawled in messy ink. "She was never yours to keep." A branch snapped behind him. He spun around, weapon raised. The scarred man stood just beyond the light, face half hidden by shadow, his mouth curved in something between a smile and a snarl. "You should have left the river alone," the man rasped. Then he vanished into the mist. Valor lunged forward, barking wildly, but Ethan held him back. He stared at the cross one last time, the ring glinting faintly in the fog, and whispered, "Not again." This time, he wouldn't let his family be taken from him. Dawn crept over Maple Hollow like a ghost reluctant to return. The fog still hugged the ground, blurring the edges of trees and rooftops. Ethan stood by the window, staring at the faint outline of the woods beyond the yard. His hands were still streaked with dirt from the clearing, where the makeshift cross stood like an open wound in the earth. On the counter lay the ring he had recovered, cleaned now but still glinting with a strange coldness. The message, "She was never yours to keep," haunted him more than the figure who'd spoken it. Valor lay near the fireplace, his fur still damp from the night air, his eyes following every movement Ethan made. He seemed restless, sensing the turmoil that filled the house. Lily sat quietly at the table, sketching again, her pencil moving in slow, deliberate lines. She was drawing the river, dark and wide, with two silhouettes standing on the bridge. Ethan recognized one of them as himself. Madison entered the kitchen wearing a thick sweater, her hair tied back loosely, her face pale but calm. "Did you find him?" she asked, her voice subdued, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace of morning. Ethan didn't turn. "No, but I found this." He held up the ring. Her eyes widened. "That's Evelyn's." "Yes." He left it on a cross in the woods. Madison's hands trembled slightly. "Why would he do that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because he wants me to follow him. He's trying to pull me into whatever this is." Madison leaned against the counter, staring at the ring. "Maybe he's not after you. Maybe it's about her. Evelyn." Ethan finally looked at her. "You said something like that before. Why?" Madison hesitated. "Because I think she knew him." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" Madison crossed her arms, avoiding his gaze. "A few weeks before Evelyn's accident, she came to see me. We weren't friends exactly. I was working at the hospital then, doing administrative work. She came in looking shaken, said she needed to update some contact information for an old file, something about a man named Caleb Voss. When I asked who he was, she said, 'Someone who doesn't know how to let go.'" Ethan's stomach dropped. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I didn't think it mattered until now," Madison snapped, her voice cracking. I thought it was just some old friend she didn't want to talk about." Ethan turned away, anger and confusion tightening inside him. He grabbed his jacket and holstered his gun. "Where are you going?" Madison asked. "To finish this." Valor stood immediately, alert. Ethan drove to the outskirts of town, to the small industrial area where the old storage unit stood. Gray metal doors stretching down a cracked asphalt lane. The sign overhead read, "Maple Hollow Secure Storage" in faded red paint. He parked, flashlight in hand, Valor following close at his side. Unit 43, Evelyn's old rental, was at the far end. The padlock was missing, the door slightly ajar. Ethan pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The smell of damp paper and rust hit him instantly. Inside, boxes were stacked unevenly, some half collapsed. He began opening them one by one. Old clothes, photo albums, children's toys, and a few folders marked "Private." In one, he found letters, dozens of them, all signed CV. The handwriting was jagged, uneven. The first line of one read, "You said you'd come back, Evelyn. You can't just erase people." Ethan's hands shook as he read another. If he finds out, it's over for both of us. He didn't need to ask who he was. Valor's sudden bark jolted him. The dog was standing near the back of the unit, growling low at a shadow. Ethan turned his flashlight toward it. A door, half hidden behind a shelf. Not a regular storage door, but an access hatch bolted to the wall. He knelt, brushed away dust, and saw the faint letters stenciled in red. "River access. Maintenance use only." He pried the bolts loose, one by one. The door opened with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow tunnel sloping downward. Cold air drifted up, smelling of algae and old water. "Stay," he told Valor, but the dog didn't move. Ethan sighed. "All right, let's go." They descended into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing softly. The deeper they went, the more Ethan felt the weight of earth above him. After several minutes, the passage opened into a small concrete chamber. The sound of running water echoed from below, the river. And standing near the opposite wall, half in shadow, was Caleb Voss. He was thinner than Ethan remembered, his gray coat soaked, his scar glinting under the flashlight beam. His eyes were wild, yet strangely lucid, like someone who had spent years living inside a single thought. "You found me," Caleb said quietly. Ethan raised his gun. "Step away from the wall." Caleb didn't move. "You shouldn't point that at me, officer. I'm the only one who knows the truth." "What truth?" Ethan demanded. Caleb smiled faintly. "That your wife wasn't who you thought she was." Ethan's grip tightened. "Say that again." Caleb stepped closer, unafraid. "She came to me the year before she died, said she was afraid of what you'd do if you found out the truth about her past. She asked me to disappear, to make her life vanish from before you." "Liar," Ethan growled. Caleb chuckled bitterly. "You think you were her first husband?" The words hit like a blow. "You're insane." Caleb's smile faded. "She didn't tell you because she loved you. She told me because she knew love never erases what came before. It only hides it. I wasn't going to hurt her, Ethan. I just wanted her to come back." Ethan shook his head. "You terrorized my family. You left messages for my daughter." Caleb's voice trembled. "I just wanted her to remember Evelyn was real, not a ghost you buried in your guilt." Suddenly, a loud rumble echoed through the chamber, a low, grinding sound from the river tunnels. Caleb looked around, startled. "They're draining the dam upstream. The tunnels will flood soon." Ethan's instincts kicked in. "We need to get out of here, now." Caleb didn't move. "Go. I made peace with this place long ago." Ethan grabbed his arm. "You're coming with me." But Caleb pulled free. "Tell her daughter I never meant to scare her. I just wanted to keep her mother's promise alive." The water surged in, fast and violent. Ethan turned to run. Valor barked, lunging ahead toward the exit. Behind them, the roar grew deafening. He looked back once, Caleb still standing there, the rising water up to his knees, his face illuminated for an instant before the current swallowed him. They burst through the hatch just as the tunnel flooded, water gushing out behind them. Ethan collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping, Valor beside him, soaked, but unharmed. He stared back at the sealed hatch, his chest tight. "It's over," he whispered, though part of him knew it wasn't. That night, the house was finally quiet. Madison slept fitfully, and Lily curled up with Valor at the foot of her bed. Ethan sat alone in the living room, Evelyn's ring on the table, its metal glinting under the lamp. He had learned the truth, that the woman he'd loved had carried secrets, and the man who haunted them was bound not by hate, but by love, warped through loss. Lily's voice came softly from the stairs. "Dad?" He looked up. She walked over, small and sleepy-eyed. "Mom's not angry anymore," she said. "I saw her. She was by the river. She said we can rest now." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I hope she's right." Valor lifted his head, tail wagging once as if in agreement. The faint sound of the wind outside carried through the window, soft and rhythmic. Not the bell this time, but the calm murmur of the river returning to peace. And for the first time in months, Ethan let himself breathe. Sometimes, the storms we face are not meant to destroy us, but to reveal the strength God placed within us long before we knew we'd need it. Ethan's journey wasn't just about finding truth. It was about learning that forgiveness is the greatest form of courage, and that even in loss, God never leaves us alone. The river that once carried sorrow became the water of renewal, washing away fear and guilt. In our own lives, we all carry rivers inside, places where memories and regrets meet. But if we listen closely, we'll hear God's whisper reminding us that love never dies. It only changes form. No matter how heavy your heart feels today, trust that His grace can turn even pain into peace. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that God still performs miracles in quiet ways. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and write Amen to bless those who are still waiting for their own miracle. May God bless you and keep you today and always.